Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, whilst the relocation of the US Embassy was being celebrated in Jerusalem, a move that was timed to coincide with the anniversary of the founding of the Israeli state 70 years ago, protests flared on the border with Gaza, where at least 60 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces. In a moment, I will be speaking to the chief Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Erekat. But first, I'm joined here in the studio by the Israeli ambassador in London, Mark Revev. Thanks for coming in.
A pleasure.
Now, the UN want to set up an independent investigation into what happened in the border in Gaza. Why will Israel not cooperate with that?
We've got to be more precise. The UN Human Rights Council voted on Friday to do that, and the UN Human Rights Council has a track record of anti-Israel bias. Not just I say so, but the Australian, British, Canadian, American governments all agree that the UN Human Rights Council has been not balanced and not fair.
So you would accept an international independent inquiry if it was run by somebody else? If it was run out of the UN Secretary-General's office, for instance, you would be happy to cooperate with that?
I'd ask the following question to British viewers and to the British government. Would they be happy that their soldiers, British soldiers in Iraq or Afghanistan, be investigated by a UN authority? Or would they prefer that it be done by the responsible British institutions? And I think we'd be the same. We would prefer that our judiciary, which is known internationally for its independence and its professionalism, that we should be able to do our own investigating processes.
So regardless of who it was, you will not accept any kind of independent inquiry into what happened, because, of course, there's much disputed between what you say and what people in Gaza say as to whether or not these shootings were justified. You're not prepared to allow anybody in to investigate that?
You're soon going to have on Saeb Erekat, and he represents the Palestinian Authority. That authority itself refuses to do joint investigations with the Hamas government in Gaza. There was an attempt assassination in March in Gaza on the Palestinian Prime Minister. The Hamas authorities offered the Palestinian Authority the chance to do a joint investigation, to be part of an investigation, and the authorities in Ramallah said no.
But your specific problem in Israel at the moment is because of what happened this week. You've been condemned by people who are normally your diplomatic friends. Alistair Burt, the Foreign Office Minister, said that the large volume of live fire was extremely concerning and implored Israel to show more restraint. Even President Macron condemned what happened there. You are looking very isolated at the moment, but you maintain the Israeli Defence Forces had to use live rounds against these largely unarmed protesters. Without some kind of international body coming to look at it, you will not convince people who are supposed to be your closest allies.
I'd urge people to look at the facts and to look at what Hamas itself said. And one of the leaders of Hamas, Al-Zahar, just said 2 days ago, he said that these weren't peaceful protests. He said it was a deliberate deception by Hamas to manipulate world opinion. And they were, unfortunately, successful in doing so.
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Whether or not the protesters had anything to do with Hamas, there are obvious reasons why they would like to take the responsibility for this for their own political ends. But by responding with live fire against these protesters who did not, you know, even if they had a few rocks or Molotov cocktails, were not armed like the Israeli Defence Forces were, and were not protected like the Israeli army was. By doing that, you've walked into Hamas's trap, haven't you? You have been condemned largely around the world for this, although you say your actions were justified. That's exactly what they wanted.
The Hamas leader in Gaza, Sinwar, himself said what the goal was. He said the goal is to breach the border, infiltrate into Israel and kill our civilians.
Now, but nobody did they? Nobody breached the border.
Because we successfully stopped them from implementing their plan by defending our border. But let's be clear.
Nobody has breached the border. Why is it necessary to use live rounds against somebody who is not in Israel?
You only use live rounds when you really have to. First, you use tear gas. You urge people not to charge the fence. You use other non-lethal crowd dispersal mechanisms. But when people are actually charging the fence, and the goal, once again,
when they're still on the other side of the fence,
if they are charging the fence violently, and the idea is to penetrate into Israel and kill our people, we have civilian communities, farms, townships, right on that border. We must protect our people. We must defend that border.
But there are reports of a young boy who was killed in a truck carrying his family who were half a kilometre away from the border. They can't possibly have represented a threat to Israel.
So once again, there are reports about all sorts of things. And The trouble is when you're dealing with the Hamas regime in Gaza, there is no independent way to check exactly what happened.
Well, that's exactly why you need an independent inquiry to come in. And if you're so confident, back up your story about what happened and refute what you say is propaganda coming from the other side.
How does anyone do an independent investigation in Gaza when it is controlled by an authoritarian regime and no one is allowed to speak out of turn? You can't demonstrate in Gaza against Hamas. You can demonstrate against Israel, of course, but you can't demonstrate against Hamas. Hamas will not allow an independent investigation. And how do we know that? Because the Palestinian Authority itself will not work with Hamas on these issues.
So Hamas is the problem, not Israel. You would welcome an independent inquiry, you just think Hamas wouldn't cooperate?
No, I would welcome, and I'd urge people to look at our own system internally of checks and balances, where inside the army we have an institution inside our Judge Advocate General's office. We have an independent judiciary which will look at these issues. Our parliament, our foreign affairs and defence commitment, which has both opposition and government in there. We have all sorts of ways that we can look at these things.
Mark Regev, thank you very much for that. And we'll turn now to Saïd Erekat, who is, of course, the chief negotiator for the Palestinian Authority. Thank you for joining us. Let's address first this question of violence on the Gaza border. You've heard Mark Regev there say that it was necessary for the Israeli Defence Forces to defend themselves against people who were trying to get into Israel to kill Israeli citizens.
Well, that really scares me, you know, when you have 64 Palestinians killed and 2,500 wounded. Not a single Israeli was wounded, not an Israeli person or a soldier or a civilian was threatened. And then you have spokesperson like Mr. Regev and Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Lieberman, the defense minister, who said there are no innocent people in Gaza. So he's giving his soldiers the free green light to kill as many as possible. And instead of Mark Regev standing tall to say, I give my condolences to these Palestinians, we should make peace and so on, he's justifying the killing and murders. Imagine how many tens of thousands of refugees have entered France, Britain, Germany, coming from the Middle East.
Imagine that these countries, sure, though, that Hamas did not actually incite some of this violence?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Mark Regev knows that in 2014, 2011, when there were clashes between Hamas and Israel, Hamas uses missiles, tunnels, guns, and so on. But not one single demonstrator was involved in this. There were people from Hamas participating. There were people from Fatah, from all political spectrums, but mainly from the civic society. And then the question. Today, the Human Rights Council said, we're going to form
on the question of whether or not Hamas were involved, I need to show you something, because we've seen a Facebook posting, and we'll put it up on the screen now. This is from the High Committee of the Return Rallies, who organise protests in Gaza and includes Hamas. And they say the demonstrators are requested to please act in accordance with the demand to bring a knife or a gun, hide them under their clothes and not use them except where there's a need to capture soldiers or residents of Israel. It's requested not to bring them, but to hand them over to not to kill them, but to hand them over to the resistance forces, as this is an important bargaining chip of which Israel is afraid. And as far as we can ascertain, that was posted on Monday morning. That sounds like an incitement.
Madam Sarah, I saw all the statements. I saw everything. But I saw on the ground who are the people who are demonstrating. Now, political parties try to use this or that. The question today is that we had demonstrations that were peaceful. Not a single person had a knife or a gun with him. They did not even get near to the fence. Because Israel is not a country, the only country on earth that did not define its borders yet. So I don't know which border they talk about in Gaza. But the point
Hamas
is,
were inciting violence of any kind, would you condemn that?
Of course, we have condemned violence. We have condemned targeting of civilians all the time. And this is what we're seeing now in the disruption of relations and so on. This is the absence of peace. This is the results of Netanyahu's policies of settlements, dictations. This is the results of Trump's administration moving the embassy and dictating on Palestinians. Had Israel, I wish that any Israeli official, I can tell you, Sarah, now, that we in the PLO have recognized the state of Israel's right to exist in peace and security on the 67 line. I want any of your Israeli guests, I want anyone to say that they are willing to recognize the state of Palestine to live in peace and security on the 67 lines. They don't do that. They do settlements, dictation, siege, enclosure, killing, murdering, massacres, and they want to get away with it. And they even refuse an investigation committee formed by the Human Rights Council and guaranteed by the Secretary General of the UN. What are you afraid of? They're trying to hide something. That's what they're refusing to have an investigation committee. We welcome an investigation committee. We welcome them to go anywhere they want, we trust their judgment, and we'll accept their report in advance.
Looking further
But
to
we
the
have
future,
never-
I accept
we have
you,
never
you want an
rejected-
investigation into what happened this week. Given that you say you no longer trust the United States as an ally in the peace process, is it time to recognise there is no peace process in the Middle East now? It is, for the meantime, dead.
No, look, there is no peace process now, you're right. But I cannot say that the peace process is dead. The only alternative for me and the Israelis is to live and let live. This is why we have recognized the Israeli right to exist. And I pray and hope that the day will come that there will rise an Israeli leadership that's willing to sit with me at the table, at the negotiating table, in order to achieve the two-state solution.
I mean,
in order to achieve the freedom of
you say you want to talk to the Israelis. The Israeli ambassador, Mark Regev, is still in the studio in London with us now. Is there anything you would like to say to him now?
Well, I know Mark. He knows me. He knows that we devoted 25 years of our times to negotiate with them. He knows that every single government he served with chose settlements and dictation, not peace and negotiations. And ignoring facts, Mark, doesn't exist. That is the truth. You rejected the two-state solution. You continue with settlement activities.
These are accusations rather than the prospect of reaching out the hand of peace.
They're not accusations. Between 2009 till 2018, the settlement activities in the West Bank and East Jerusalem increased by 40%.
Okay, well,
we'll
need to leave it there, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Erekat and Mr. Regev.
Thank you.